This is a reading from the Notebooks by Maria Valtorta, 1944, September 13th. Jesus says, "It is not an optical illusion. You really see, shining on the agonizing, bloody face of your Jesus in Gethsemane, the smile that flourished there when the angel of God brought into the darkness, enveloping me entirely, a supersubstantial light, which allowed me to see the faces of those who would love me in the future ages. The chalice of comfort, the metaphorical chalice given by the angel to my spirit, poisoned with the chalice of expiation," Luke chapter 22, verse 43, "was nothing but the future illumination of all the good my death would occasion, opposed to all the evil my death would not overcome, and of all the hearts that would love me. Then a smile blossomed over the tears, a security descended upon the anguish. Sacrifice, while remaining tremendous, becomes bearable when one knows that it is useful. I now knew this, and I smiled at this knowledge. I also saw you, little John. I shall now show you the smile at that time, to bring you comfort." My note. Just as 15 days ago, while looking at the card for my inclusion in the Servants of Mary, which you gave me, I have seen such a beautiful, beautiful smile flowering on Jesus' face in the garden. The face became luminous. It seems to be saying, "I am happy," and smiling at a secret interlocutor, perhaps his own self, to whom it is sweet to convey, as to a faithful companion, after the anguish of being convinced that the sacrifice was so useless, the peace of his conviction that the sacrifice was useful. And I, looking at him, said to myself, "What tricks sight plays! Why, here I'm seeing Jesus smile at this moment of agony. But do you see how Jesus responds? I am not deceived then. Blessed be he for that smile, for I really can't take any more. And if I were to say what's blaring inside, I would disobey you and the advice of the mother. I am thus silent. But silence does not mean choking off those voices. They cannot be choked off. For every minute, with its physical sufferings, with its moral void, and with the increasingly intense need to have you close to my dying, makes them emerge again. Ah, Lord." Then, on September 14th, the Holy Cross. Jesus says, "Come, Sister Maria of the Cross. For a time you were just Maria of the Cross. Do you remember that time? You loved me. I loved you because you loved me with all your strength then. You have always been absolute in your behavior. You have never measured pros and cons, how much and in what way, or ifs and buts, but when you hurled yourself into an enterprise or an affection. When you came to me, you came entirely, with all your capacity for loving and suffering for me, with even more than your capacity for suffering, and I gave you the strength you lacked, because I liked your generous impulsiveness, your thoughtless, holy prodigality in sacrifice. Even if you had died then, you would have been justified, for you obeyed the command to love God with all of oneself, body, soul, mind, and heart." Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5. It seemed to you then that it was impossible to love more. And since you loved your Jesus, especially in his role as Redeemer, you wanted to call yourself Maria of the Cross. The cross. Your love. It seemed to you then that it was impossible to love more. But, little spouse, you see that the love of God and being one with God shares unlimitedness with God. One can always love more and never reach the limit just the same, for the more love is completed and perfected, the more it grows. Something completed in the world, a work completed by men, is no longer subject to increase. It is finished and remains as such. To touch it up and add parts would mean ruining it. But love is not something human. It is superhuman. You have the capacity to love God because you are of God, and charity can then move from perfection to greater perfection as the Spirit is perfected. Ecclesiasticus says, "The fear of God is the beginning of his love, and to it the beginning of faith must be joined." Ecclesiasticus chapter 25, verse 16 in the Vulgate. The fear of God is the first degree of love. Those who fear already respect, recognizing that the one towards whom their fear is directed is their superior, master, or at least a chief. Children who are not perfectly good fear their parent. Employees who are not perfectly good fear their supervisors. Animals that are not perfectly good fear their tamer. The believer who stops at the first turn on the mystical stairway rising to God fears God, whose face he sees flashing up above, very far off, which, when seen from such a distance, looks severe, for only the main outlines are grasped. But his smile and his voice escape notice. Many remain paralyzed by the majesty of God and forget God's fatherhood, such a good fatherhood that it went so far as to immolate his firstborn son to save his other children. These do not do evil because they fear God. They will thus be rewarded with eternal life. But they will not receive the reward which is already at work while the earthly day still lasts. In those who do not limit themselves to fearing God, but overcoming fear, take the second turn on the mystical stairway and pass on to the desire to know God more closely, certain that if they are able to know him better, they will love him. And indeed, the more they rise, the more they perceive what God is. Desire turns into affection. Affection, which God rewards with softly inviting caresses, turns into love. And love, oh love, love no longer goes up the stairway step by step. Love puts forth wings and flies. My beloved one, have you ever seen a little bird in his first flights? He begins them from a tile to the ridge of a roof, or from a low branch to a higher one. He then gets more daring. From the tile he conquers the summit of a nearby house, higher up, or the top of the nearest tree, and up there he chirps with joy. There is so much sunlight and warmth and azure, and the world, filled with snares, rogues, and cats, is now far away. But then the little bird says, "What can limit my freedom is still too close." And he looks, and he sees that on a tower, or a steeple, or over there at the top of a tall tree rising up on the summit of a knoll, there is even more sunlight, freedom, and blue sky, and he is off with a trill. But the sun is even higher up, and the little bird, now sure of himself, launches out, up, up, up. How happy he is! He no longer feels weight. The air carries him, and the sunbeam seems to attract him. Strength grows in him at every instant. He goes and sings. He flies and rejoices, the master of the air. The spirit that has put forth wings of love also does this. The time comes in which it feels itself to be in its element, only when it loves impetuously, plunging into heavenly oceans, carried off by whirlwinds of divine passion. Poor men rack their brains with instruments, which they at first create for a scientific purpose, and then, when the demonic asp bites them more atrociously, use for a criminal purpose, to go higher and higher into the stratosphere. But their ascent has and always will have a limit. Love's does not. It has no limit. It rises and rises and rises, and God goes on increasing the strength of the one ascending, infusing him more and more into the creature, who is thus increasingly deified. And the more he rises, the more he loves, and the more he loves, the more he rises. He completes his love and his ascent when, like a skylark, fulminated with the rapture of flight, he dies to the world. That is, he falls with a final throb of his soul, imprisoned in the flesh, upon the heart of God, and conquers his love and his eternal freedom. You, once Maria of the Cross by your desire, are now Sister Maria of the Cross by my will. I have given you, as to a bride in marriage, my domain. You have deserved it with your constant ascent. Look from the peak you are resting on. Look and compare your fear as a believer. The fear of God is the love of believers, to your love as a bride, and look at the stages of your growth. Can it still increase? Yes. The love of the saints is a vertigo of love, and I call everyone to such love. I call you, beloved one. I speak to you from my cross, but I do not limit myself to speaking to you in the midst of the purple of my blood. I draw you to myself to clothe you in it. Come, and in the middle of a world which hates, let us be the ones to love each other, you drying my wounds with your kisses, and I drying your tears with my love. Come and rest on my peace.